Welcome to the People Powered Community Podcast, where we dive into the inspiring stories of go-to-market professionals who have leveraged their skills to create strong and lasting connections within their community. Get ready to be inspired and learn how you too can harness your business superpower for good.
Hello, and welcome to the People Powered Community Podcast. I'm your host, Leslie Greenwood, CEO and founder of Chief Evangelist Consulting. And today I'm super excited to have Jen Allen-Knuth on our show, and she is the community lead at Lavender. So, Jen, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. I will take any excuse I can to talk to you for as long as I get to talk to you today.
Yay, I'm excited. It's very let's talk a little bit about how we met each other. I think it was me and I was thinking about what am I going to name my business? This is what I was thinking and I think it was Mike Simmons said, "Oh, evangelism. You should talk to Jen." Like, "Sure, I'll talk to Jen." And then we just had this really great conversation and all of a sudden we're on text and, chat with each other every once in a while so yeah, it's been really great getting to know you it's really just the last 6 months.
Yeah, you're leaving out the part where you saved my butt with my screw up on buying Slack licenses. So that was a formative moment in our relationship of my panic button call to you. So thank you for leaving that out, but I'll be honest and say you helped me
I
big
don't think it
time.
was the panic call to you. I think I was, like, on your thing, and I was like, you need to do this ASAP, and this, and this, and this." I don't think you asked for help. I think I just, like, told you I was helping you, so you didn't really have a choice, to be quite
There
honest.
you go. There you go. Well, it was very welcomed and very
Oh.
appreciated.
It's all good. It's all good. I love to talk about some Slack. So, well, awesome. Well, we're going to talk, in depth about you today. But then we're also going to talk about your superpower. So, kind of where that came from, what you're doing with it now, and then how that, intertwines on how you think about and live and work in community. And I know you're heavily involved in lots of communities and then the community and slash audience that you build on LinkedIn, et cetera. So I guess start off, tell us a little bit about you and where you got to or how you got to where you are today, because there's been a lot of changes here recently.
I know. I went for 18 years with almost no changes. And then in the last 6 months, I've just crammed them all into this part. So I started in sales in '04. I spent actually my entire career as a frontline seller, different forms of it. So account manager, kind of $50,000 price point sale up to millions of dollar price point sale. Never wanted to go up the leader or manager track. But in 2021, I came across the role of chief evangelist and loved the idea of it because I felt myself really drawn to opening deals and opening conversations. And so I created that role at Challenger, where I had spent basically my entire career. And then end of, December 2022, I left Challenger, thought I was just going to go out on my own, do a speaking business and speak at sales kickoffs and things like that. And then got a call from my good friends at Lavender, and they sucked me right in to a community role on a marketing team, which I'd never been on before. So that's how I got to where I am today.
That is so crazy, and especially having been at Challenger for so long.
Right.
um, Tell me how where did you come up with the chief evangelist title? Where did you decide? Because you were one of the first people that I talked to about that, and then hearing about it and hearing how there weren't a lot of metrics and KPIs for you, very similar to some other folks we know. But now that role is really coming to be quite popular. But I think there's still a certain amount of uncertainty around measurement and KPIs. So how did you start with that evangelist role?
So I spend a lot of time on LinkedIn, probably more than I should admit. And I was
Really?
scrolling. I was doom scrolling one day and I came across an article that Ethan Butte at BombBomb had written. And you're shaking your head. You've probably seen it
We
too.
we've
I've shared it
all
with Yes.
we no, we all ran into it. It must have the best SEO ever, that
Yes.
article.
Yes. And it just, first of all, I'd never heard the term. I thought it was really strange. I still think it's really strange, even though I advocated for it. And I read the article, and all of a sudden, as I was reading it, I was thinking, gosh, this is the type of thing I've been doing off the side of my desk to build my own demand and become less reliant on marketing. I had no idea there was a name for it. And so I just devoured that article And then I use that to say, here's the business problem that I'm seeing here at Challenger, which is inbound leads we get are great, but we just don't get enough of them. And so if we're not starting conversations that make someone recognize, hey, maybe I have a problem I didn't realize I have, we are going to have a conversion rate on those inbound leads that is probably really unrealistic. And so I use that article as a reference point to say it's not just, I mean, I didn't come up with this idea. It's worked here, it's valid, and use that to start the business case build for the role. And because I had been kind of doing a lot of those activities off the side of my desk, I was able to point to and say, look, these 6 deals originated from it. Look how much shorter the sales cycle was. Look how much higher up in the organization we started. And so I was really lucky to work for a business that was open to trying something that many think sounds a little goofy or strange, but I've grown to be really fond of.
Well, I named my home business after it, so if it's goofy and strange, well, I think I'm stuck with it at this point. So, kinda crazy, kinda crazy. Well, how does that compare? Because of course I've listened to your podcasts when you were with Challenger before, and I saw you all over LinkedIn. So how does that compare to what your role is right now at Lavender?
Yeah, I love this question because when Will Allred, who's one of our founders, reached out to me about the role, the first thing I said to him was, well, the very first thing I said was, I'm not going back to full time, but I can give you names of other people who I think would be great at this. And he's like, just be open minded. But the second thing I said to him is, I said, I don't actually think your business needs an evangelist because you are essentially the evangelist, right?
True.
For those people that
A very
follow
good job
Will,
of that.
he's amazing at it. And we laughingly call him the email guy, but when you have someone like that who's also a founder, I would argue you don't need to have internal competition to create another voice. So there wasn't exactly a need for the same type of role I played at Challenger. However, one of the things that I loved that they talked about was this idea that while they don't have their own formal community, there were places where Lavender users were really loud about what they were learning and what they were experiencing and the results that they were seeing. And they said, we see this. We can't, as a part time aspect of our job, do it justice and
Mm,
acknowledge and, make celebrate this to the extent that we would like to as a business. So, what we'd like to do is bring someone in who already has a voice with salespeople, who has credibility, who can amplify our users, who can learn from what they're talking about, learn from what they're frustrated with, bring that back in a way where we can continue to get better and we can continue to make our users spotlighted. And so as soon as they started talking about that, I was like, that's a twist. I haven't done it before,
mm.
but I love that because I love celebrating others. And so it felt like a good fit.
Yeah, so your job right now, you're not only obviously on LinkedIn, and other places, but you also are in other communities? So, like, that your job is to go be a community member, but with the point of view through Lavender, finding your evangelists actually probably within those different communities and then elevating them, and so you're basically building evangelists?
I mean, gosh, Leslie, I never thought about it like that, but I think it's a really smart way to think about. Like, this was the other thing that really attracted to me. I said, if you want someone to come in and build just another Slack community, again, I have only done it once. I'm not your best person for this. And they said, it's actually not what we want. There are so many great communities that exist out there. Yeah, exactly. There's so many great communities that exist out there. We want someone who can go to them and who can share things that are going to help advance the conversations that are already happening in those communities. So not try to draw away, but
Right.
add to, and someone that will be welcomed in that, right? And so I was like, that's really, really in line with how I think about it because there are so many amazing communities and they're all slightly different in what they deliver for their community members. And that has probably been the most fun part of my job is getting more involved in them and seeing just how different community
Mm.
can take shape and form depending on who built it, who's in it, what they're trying to solve for.
Yeah, it's, when I think people think of online community, they kinda just have something in their mind, and they don't realize, and I'm sure you're seeing this now, is like the different personality, the culture, the rituals. I mean, I talk a lot about what does it feel like? I want my customers to think about what does it feel like when someone joins your community? What do you want it to feel like? And I bet, can you tell, like, do they feel different to you, even if one's a sales community and another's a sales community, or you end up in the sales AE channel? Like, how does that what's your thought on that?
Oh my gosh, I think you said that perfectly, right? One of the communities we were really tight with, they actually just shut down recently, but was Thursday Night Sales or
Oh, yeah.
TNS,
Mhm.
right? And I had never been up until end of last year, and my first time going, I'm expecting, okay, this is a sales community. It's gonna be like, how do you write a cold email and how do you make a cold call and all this stuff. It was like deeply, deeply difficult personal challenges these folks were
Mm,
bringing to the conversation. Like there were community nights where like people were crying and
mhm,
talking about grief and loss. And I was just like, wow, this is a whole other level of connection, like true community connection than I ever thought would be possible in something that was job related. And so, like, that
mm,
experience really taught me that it doesn't have to be this stiff thing. But at the same time, it was also really special and unique to their community. If I just then tried to rip that off and say, okay, we're going to do that here at Lavender, it would have been wrong, inauthentic, and just lazy, right? So it's like, I think
mm,
you can take bits and pieces of things that you love,
mhm,
but still assemble them in a way that is uniquely your own puzzle.
mhm. I think, the one thing I'm just thinking of, and we'll move on to the next question because I've just been so
Mhm.
enthralled so far with this the way this conversation is going, is, like, when I talk about, building or growing evangelists, it's identify, engage, um, what's the last one? Oh, empower, and then amplify. So those are the 4
Yes,
steps to
I like
build
that.
evangelist. That's exactly what you're doing within those communities, and when I talk about evangelists, which is what like, when you and Ethan and I talked in our separate conversations and you were talking about how you do evangelism, like, I don't want to do evangelism like that. I wanna take the
Yeah.
normal Joes and Janes and Sallys, and I wanna turn them into the evangelists, which I think Lavender actually does an amazing job. I mean, goodness, you have some dude that put, like, lavender on a tattoo or something?
Sims, yeah, Sims Tallison.
Yeah, yeah. So, I mean, you
Yeah.
obviously have done a great job, but, like, your job is to go in there and find more, amplify more, and get them to kinda go take your flag out into the world.
Yeah, and I would say equally so too, it's to, um, learn from some of the bad things, right? Like,
Mm,
we
mhm.
have been very fortunate to have a lot of good things said about us, but like any
Right.
business, you're gonna get some people that are frustrated or don't see it the same way, and so my job is not to convert them, my job is to learn from them, right? Because if
Mhm,
they
mhm.
feel passionately enough to speak up, more chances are somebody else feels that way too, and that's the type of thing that I should be bringing back to the business to say, "We need to get ahead of this, we need to listen to this," because how often do you really take the time to write into a company and say, "This is very, very, very frustrating to me." Sometimes we just say, "Forget it," and I give up. So I think that's where social is such a beautiful opportunity for companies to learn, but it's tough if you aren't learning in the right places because you just won't see or hear those things.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the reasons why some people, like, will build their own communities because it is a great listening post to hear. Like, you wanna hear voice of the customer? Like, go log into your community, and you're gonna hear it directly from them, and, they're gonna tell you the good and the bad, and I think that goes actually back to a whole, like, thesis or point of view on how a company feels about their customer to begin with. Because there are definitely lots of companies will not spend they'll be customer focused, but they're not gonna actually spend the time listening to the customer and making edits and things like that. So I think, kudos to Lavender for
Thanks.
that one.
Thank you.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, let's talk a little bit about your superpower. I have an idea of what I thought your superpower was, but like to hear from you. What is your superpower?
So first of all, I absolutely love this format of this show because no one has ever asked me what my superpower was. So kudos to you because like that's the hardest part of doing a show is coming up with something that's truly makes you the guests think about themselves.
Mhm.
So where I landed was, and it's an overused term, but it's really, really, really deeply personal to me, is vulnerability in sales. And so specifically when I was thinking about it, what I meant was for a very long time in sales, I felt like I had to show up a certain way and put on almost play a role of what I thought a
Mhm.
good salesperson would look like. When I started getting more involved on LinkedIn, I had a ton of fear of being trolled or called out for being wrong or why are you even posting, right? Because who are you? And there was a pivotal moment where Josh Braun, who's someone I love learning from in sales, if you don't follow him, you should,
Yeah.
listeners.
Everybody else should. Go ahead.
Yeah, you had figured. He reached out to me and said, "Look, the stuff you're posting is really smart, but it lacks any sort of personal take on this. I don't know at all who you are." And
Wow.
yeah,
That's obviously pre me knowing you.
That's totally like, it was, I think it was March 2020, right? And I was
Yep.
just posting, like, stats and research and because I knew it would be safe. And I was like, "No one can argue with a stat that is, like, heavily researched." And so he said that, and I said, "Well, my fear is people are gonna say I'm wrong." And he was like, "I would rather have someone say you're wrong than say, like, nothing at all," right? Because the whole point of this platform is to have dialogue and debate and have conversations. And so it hit me like a ton of bricks, and the very next day, I was like, "All right, I'm going in the deep end." I posted about losing my dad, and
Mm,
I didn't even post about that on my, like, Instagram or Facebook channels, right? I
mhm.
hadn't been ready to talk about it, and it was crazy. Like, that, by going all in on that and being super, super vulnerable in still a relevant business, way, it really became something I was enamored by. And so instead of now posting just a stat, I would go in and I would say, "Look, I lost this deal. And now looking back, I would have done this, this, and this differently." Or, "Hey, I used to think this was the exact right way to win. And then this happened. And now this is what I've learned as a result." And my fear, and then I'll shut up. My fear was like, people are going to think you don't belong here. You don't deserve to be here. And it was the exact opposite. I got invited to speak on more stages than ever before, to be on more podcasts, to be, speaking with teams, because people are like, that's what connects us, is when you're open and you don't pretend like sales is easy. So that's why I picked it. Sorry, I know I went off on a
Okay.
bit of
No, no,
a
no. No, you
road
didn't.
with
You were
that one.
great. You were great. Okay, so talk about, I mean, we talked before in when we were chatting. I'm like, well, I can imagine that you are so chatty in your real life, or you've probably, oh, you were that kid in school who was, like, had their hand up in the front row, and you're like, no. But we can talk more about it. But I wonder where, like, how did you show up, if you don't mind answering this, like,
Yeah.
how before, sales, before LinkedIn, like, how did you show up in life? Do you feel like you, as a person outside of the business person, do you feel like you showed up authentically and vulnerably, or do you think that that really kind of got raised the bar once you kind of went on LinkedIn?
Gosh, you ask good questions. I feel like I have always been the type of person that has small groups of friends that I go very deep with,
Mhm.
right? So I would go very deep with those that are closest to me. I would stay very surface with those that are not. And I would be funny and fun to hang out with and all of those things, but I never went deep. And I think part of that is why it seemed like such a scary move for me,
Mhm.
because when you are posting on LinkedIn or speaking to an audience, you know nobody. Right? So it went against the grain of everything that I was about. I'm actually quite a hermit. My husband will tell everybody that. He's like, "You think she's outgoing? You think she's extroverted? She, like, holes up in her bedroom."
Oh my
So
gosh.
it's like you asking that question helps me piece together that, right? Because I honestly, I never really considered that, but it was probably what held me back.
Mhm. I'd say that I'm very similar. So if I look at my bridesmaids in my wedding, I seem to have can have one really good best friend from every stage of life. So I had my
Yes.
childhood best friend, my college best friend, my post-college best friend. You know what I mean? Like, everybody came from a certain spot. And it's very interesting to see, like, that's very similar to me. And oh yeah, you will definitely find me in my pajamas in the bedroom. Um, a great Saturday is like, oh, this is I don't shower and I just stay in my pajamas all day. Like, that's the best
Soul
day ever.
sister, soul sister.
That's
Ah,
that's what I love. Just order me
same.
some coffee and we will be totally fine. So, um, what are the things, I mean, obviously this is more of a learned skill for you,
Mhm.
that you've turned into this superpower. So what are the things that you do right now to kind of feed it and keep that nurtured?
Yeah, so one of the things that I really am intentional about is when I have a podcast like this or a speaking engagement at a sales kickoff, when I'm thinking about the topic, I'm very, very, I try to be very, very diligent about saying, what is a personal, vulnerable story I can tell on this? Like, I know you've had Ravi on, Ravi Rajani. I
Mhm.
absolutely adore him.
Mhm.
As much as I troll him on LinkedIn, I adore
I
him.
love your
And I'm
trolling, by the way. I'm just gonna add, I'm just gonna throw in that my superpower, I think your superpower is actually trolling, random people. You and Samantha McKenna both,
I
like,
learned
her
from her.
trolling of Matt Green and your trolling of Ravi are just, like, the best.
It's my secret joy, and I learned a lot from McKenna. Um, yeah, I think storytelling truly is something I was really weak at for a long time, and I noticed the more I do it, the better I get at it, the closer of a connection I form. So I could stand up on a stage and say a ton of smart things and get very few people connecting with me on LinkedIn afterwards because it's forgettable. Or I can stand up on a stage, say smart things, but pepper in stories that make me human and make me relatable and get some of the most amazing messages and DMs. And
Mhm.
that's the feeling I'm chasing is
Mhm.
knowing that it matters.
Yeah. That's awesome. So it is a skill. I mean, it's your I mean, for you, it's kinda like born with it in certain, situations, not
Mhm.
necessarily born with it on a larger scale, but then just, like, kinda learn the skill, practice it through storytelling. I'm curious how you integrate this superpower into how you think about and participate in community.
Mm, yes. I would actually say that one thing I probably screwed up a lot before is when I saw someone asking a question. Like, so if I'm in a Slack group, right, and someone's
Mhm,
asking a question, or if I'm in a live community on a teaching a skill or something. When someone asks a question of something that they're struggling with, I think where I fell down before or fell short before is not acknowledging how much strength that takes, right? To be in a
mhm,
room of people or on a giant Slack group and say, I'm struggling. And so I would just jump to the answer. And I still catch
mhm.
myself doing that from time because it's like you're moving from one thing to another and you just want to
Right.
help and you jump in, right? What I try to be so intentional about now is acknowledging and saying, thank you for sharing that. That is really tough. I struggled with that too. So it feels safer if I give an answer and they're like, I don't know if it's like everything I need. I think it breaks down that barrier to make them feel more comfortable saying, hey, can you help me a little bit more with this? And so just something that small, what probably seems very insignificant, I think again just goes back to forming a deeper human connection with someone who is having a harder time.
I think that also goes back to the way we talked about the culture of different communities as well. Where you could go in there and say like, "Hey, what's the background? Like, what made you ask the question?" And gosh, that is a hard question. Or you decide to just DM them and just like, "Hey, I saw your question. You know, I had a few questions." Things like that. And
Yeah.
it also just makes you a really good community member. Like, there's so many people I've had on the show so far. I'm just like, "Can I just duplicate you and put you in all the communities that I build?" Because then I know I have like this core group of people who are gonna, like, do exactly what I want them to do, which will
Aw.
completely make the community, like, much more, successful until we teach everybody else the culture that we want, for the community. So I think also, like, when you mention your superpower of vulnerability, like, you can the way I'm seeing it is, like, you can be empathetic to those that are going and asking those questions, um, and understanding that.
Yeah. I mean, think empathy is one of those things in sales that everybody talks about. I mean, everyone's like, you should be so empathetic and be empathetic to your buyer. And then when it comes down to it, it's the first thing that we skip over, right? So whether it's community, whether it's a sales conversation, whether it's an internal conversation, it's just, I go back to when we're rushed, when we're trying to do a lot, these things are the first things that fall down, yet they're probably the most important things. And empathy, especially as a community member, is just so important because if I am joining a community, it is because I am intentionally seeking a connection, right? On a sales call, you could argue like maybe the person doesn't care at all, but a community, like that's what it's about. It's that
Mhm.
human connection with someone else. So we have to keep that front of mind. I'm not perfect at it, but I do try to be pretty intentional about it.
Yeah. Your story made me think of when I first started working or when I joined Pavilion as a member. And I'm like, "Oh my god, like there's all these CROs and CMOs of these
Right.
amazing companies." I'm like, "I'm not gonna ask any questions. I am just going to listen, listen, listen." It was a great learning.
Yeah.
But in that first step of taking that, asking that question or commenting on the post or giving advice. And now I'm like, okay, I'm going to give advice. And if you don't like it or it's wrong, great, now I learned something because you told me I was wrong. Awesome, let's go.
Right.
So, yeah, I'd say for those of you participating in community, do not be afraid to ask the question, give your opinion. I think everybody has an opinion to share that is gonna be valuable to somebody. Um, I'll just tell you a quick story. I was on a
Yeah.
welcome call, and we did a breakout session, And in that, we had both associates, analysts, and executives. So I had a CRO and I also had an SDR in that thing. And we were talking about, I asked them what their expertise was. And the SDR said, "Oh, I'm just an SDR. I don't have anything, And the CRO said, "Absolutely not. You have a fresh perspective. You have new ideas. You're coming at it from a completely different point of view than I am." And like hearing that, like that's what you want. That's like the epic gold of a community when you get that type of attitude and someone, pumping someone up and someone, being slightly vulnerable and a little bit of imposter syndrome about what they brought to the table. But, you know, I love that. I think you and I just loved community way too much.
I know. I mean, that story is is the best, right? Because I hear this narrative now on LinkedIn of like, if you haven't been in sales for 15 years, like we don't want to read your posts about how to sell. And I'm just like, why? Why do we want to just keep doing everything we've been doing? I love when I find someone who has a really strong point of view. I think where people get into a danger zone is when they're like, I'm an expert, right? So as long as you're
Mm,
not positioning yourself as an expert, there's a term that I heard a while ago. Jed Marl said it for the first time that I ever heard was learning out loud, right? And as long as you frame
mm,
it as I'm
mhm,
I'm just learning out loud. I'm not saying I'm right or wrong, but here's what I've learned. Like there's a guy, Junior Lardy over at Pickle. He's an AE, and he
mhm,
is
mhm,
constantly posting like,
mhm,
"Hey, I tried this it bombed and here's what I learned out of it." And I'm like, I have such an appreciation for that. I'd much rather read that post than some
mhm.
old geezer who's telling me like, pick up the phone. Like, I got you, dude. Like I heard that before. So,
I'm
but yeah, I love that story because that's what you want, right? You want people feeling comfortable speaking up because that's how new perspectives are formed.
awesome. You kinda gave us this before, but just a little bit more. What like, one tangible piece of advice if there was someone out there who's like, "Yeah, I feel really comfortable now. I've practiced the skill and with, being vulnerable." Like, what would you tell them? What's one piece of advice they could go away with today?
Yeah, I would say nail your story. It can feel very easy, and this is just general public speaking
Mhm,
advice. I think not that I'm an expert, but I think it's very easy to think of a time in our head. But then when we start telling it, I think we immediately get that feeling of, I don't want to share too much. What should I
mhm,
say? Am I going to still be perceived as an expert? So I would say practice your story in advance. Know how the choreography of that story is going to go. So if you are invited on a show or to speak or wherever, and the topic is, I don't know, social selling, right? We'll just use that because we've been talking about
mhm,
this. Before I ever talk about what to do in social selling, I'm going to tell a story about the stuff that I got wrong, what I learned from it, what I changed, what was the belief or assumption that prevented me from thinking that way before. And then I go into what I do. When we do that and we allow people to come along with us on that journey,
mhm,
I
mhm.
think that's where we have the ability to really, really connect versus just like, I'm going to stand up on a stage and say, I think you should do this in social because it worked for me. Well, I don't know. Like maybe you're different. Why should I believe you? So I think that's the upfront story and using vulnerability there. Practice, 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 practice that.
I think that you could take that from speaking on a stage to actually a LinkedIn post. It's the
Yeah.
journey and story that you just told, you could absolutely weave that into a LinkedIn post, and I will tell you, I definitely, I did the expert thing last week, and didn't work out so well. So, I completely understand, and I need to, follow your instructions going forward and make sure that I'm learning out loud and not pretend not that I was pretending, but I quoted some
No.
stat, and then someone who actually knows a ton more than me said, "Where did you get that stat?" I'm like, "Oh, crap. It's a 2011 stat from Community."
We've all done it. We've all
I'm
done
like,
it.
"Oh, damn. Yeah, no, that wasn't good." So, well, we all again, vulnerability. I totally got called out and, it's totally okay.
Exactly.
Well,
And what was my reaction in that moment? It wasn't,
you
"Oh,
just cracked up.
you're bad for doing that," right? It's like, "Oh, I've done that too." And it makes me feel closer to you. And that's what we want.
We've all done it. Oh my goodness. Well, Jen, this has been such a terrific episode. I appreciate you taking the time to share your experience and, a little bit into your life story. And I'm okay that I challenged you a little bit outside of your box, but I know I can find you on LinkedIn. Is there any other place that people should find you?
I told you I was joking with you beforehand. I've only ever made one TikTok. I never get out my TikTok handle because it's an embarrassing TikTok, but I left it up just for those of you that are sleuths. But yeah, LinkedIn's my jam. That's where I spend most of my
Okay.
time.
When I post my first TikTok soon, I
Yes.
will follow you, and then maybe you can follow me back, and I'll have 2 followers then.
Deal.
All
Deal.
right. Well, awesome. That's all we have for today's episode. Thank you so much, everyone, for taking the time to listen, and I will see you live next week.